Good afternoon, and welcome to the on-record portion of the Rockbridge Report. I'm Tori Dickerson, and I'm joined here today by Blalock of the Rockbridge County Sheriff's Office. Captain Blalock, thank you for joining us today.
Fine. Glad to be here.
Thank you. How long have you been in law enforcement in Rockbridge County?
This July will be 25 years.
25 years. And have you been captain for all of that time?
I was promoted to captain in 1993, a little over 19 years ago, under Sheriff Day. I was hired, Sheriff Reynolds hired me in 1986. I was right out of high school, went to work in the old jail, which was here in downtown Lexington. Worked there for a couple years, and then when the move out to the new regional jail, worked the regional jail for a couple years, and then started on the road, and then worked my way through investigations, and then promoted to chief deputy.
Okay, so you worked at the jail, and what differentiates such, like maybe someone that works at the jail, a patrolman, a captain? What is different about being a captain than any of those other positions?
The captain is an administrative position, more into management. The correctional officers in the regional jail, they work there. They provide security for the jail, and maintain the security and the inmates. Make sure that they have all the necessities that they need. Patrol officers and deputies, they're out working the road at night. They're the ones who respond when you call 911 or call for the police. They're the ones responding to your calls. But we also have a number of investigators who follow up on a lot of those calls and work the cases. And we also have a very active regional drug task force that has officers from the Sheriff's Office as well as Lexington and Buena Vista Police Departments.
Okay. And you mentioned that right out of high school you entered law enforcement. When did you first realize you wanted to go into law enforcement?
Law enforcement was not a career I thought a lot about. It kind of happened upon me. I gave it a try. Didn't realize that it would be something I would become a career. Through school, I always thought that I would be somewhat involved in agriculture, farming. And once I started here, I was encouraged to stay, and here I am 25 years later.
Now, you said it happened upon you. Could you expand upon that a little bit?
Actually, Sheriff Day, I was working after the summer I graduated from high school, and I tell the story. I was different places that day, and everywhere I had been, they said, you know, Bobby Day's looking for you. At the time, he was a deputy, and so I'm thinking, you know, what in the world is he looking for me for, and what have I done, you know? So finally, when we ran into each other, he wanted me to come and try and apply for the job at the jail. And I went there the first day, came home. My parents asked how I liked it. Basically told them I didn't. And my mother, you know, told me, you know, you ought to go back and try it and see how you get along. And so that's kind of how it happened. And
so was the community small enough at that point that everyone knew the sheriff, or was Sheriff Day the sheriff at that time?
No, he was a deputy at the time.
Okay.
The sheriff's office was small enough. There were, at the time, 14 road deputies. And now there's about 30. There were, I think, 5 or 6 jailers, and that's the job that I started out with. And but you know, they were as it is now, deputies are well known sort of in the area where they're from, and you know, Bobby Day was well known in the North End. So when they said he was looking for me, I knew exactly who they were talking about.
And you mentioned that you thought you were going to do something in agriculture.
That was my love at first, was agriculture. I'm still involved in it. My family operates a family farm in Fairfield. My wife and 14-year-old son are very involved in it, as well as both my parents and my wife's parents. And we do a local business where we sell local meat at the farmers markets and as well as off the farm.
And have you had this farm since you were growing up? Is that why you wanted to go into agriculture?
My grandparents had farms. The farm that we operate now is a combination of my wife's parents' farm and then a place that we were able to buy that adjoins. So it's something that has stayed with me throughout, and something I've always enjoyed.
How do you balance, I mean, I would imagine that working in law enforcement is very time consuming. How do you balance agriculture and your law enforcement career?
Well, I have a lot of help at the farm and as well at the sheriff's office. I mean, there's times that both are demanding. There's times that certainly the farm has suffered from my involvement and needs at the sheriff's office. But I have a strong support system at home, and that's our hobby. You know, we don't take family vacations or you know, play golf. That's what we do.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's certainly something very different for a family to have this one joint hobby. That's very cool. As looking at the Rockbridge County Sheriff's Office, what do you think is the most typical call that comes in?
The most typical call, well, I guess the call that we receive the most is larcenies, whether
Really?
it's shoplifting or just larcenies from businesses, larcenies from homes, buildings. And that's sort of been spurred by the increase in the profitability in gold, the increased value of scrap metal, and then some, I guess, of the economy as well that's driving some of the larcenies that we see, especially shoplifting.
So you've been in law enforcement for almost 25 years. Has it always been larcenies? You mentioned that the increasing value in scrap metal and the economy. Is this a trend you see on the rise, these larcenies?
Well, larcenies have probably always been one of the most common calls we receive. That has just escalated in recent years. And then domestics, we receive a good many domestics, normally about average one a day.
A domestic?
Domestic would be a call between family members, either an argument or a fight between family members.
Does that include domestic abuse as well?
That includes domestic abuse. A number of years ago, we applied for a grant to hire a domestic violence sexual assault investigator, and that now we have a full-time person dedicated to that. He works closely with Project Horizon, the battered shelter here in town, and then he follows up with victims of domestic violence and helps them through the system and makes sure they get the resources that they need and it's available to them.
What do you think might have triggered this rise in domestic calls?
You know, I'm not sure the domestic calls rise has, we've seen that much of a rise. It's sort of always been something there that we've had to combat. And what we try to do now is to try to go in and educate and to break that cycle of violence. A lot of it's learned behavior, that the kids grow up in an abusive family, and you know, there's additional resources in the community now to help to combat that and to break the cycle.
And as a law enforcement officer, what is the most important advice you could give a member of the community about keeping themselves safe for our area?
You know, we still live in a very safe area, but you know, if you know your surroundings, and you know, be wary. We have quite a few scams. Anyone with a telephone or internet can be a victim, and there's so many different ways that people can be scammed, and those that are doing it are very convincing, and it's something that you know, I like to talk about whenever I can to make people aware that if it's out there, if it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is.
And you mentioned that we still live in a very safe area. Is that comparatively speaking with other areas around us? Could you expand upon that a little bit?
Well, we're surrounded with, or north and south are more congested areas, more populated areas. And we see a lot of drug trafficking, a lot of people coming into our area from those different areas. So we try to work closely with those other departments. And relatively speaking, we're still very fortunate to live in the area that we do.
Why do you think there's so much drug trafficking in our area? Do you think that it is because we're so close to the interstate, or kind of that crossroads between 64 and 81? Do you think that could be a cause?
Well, yes, the proximity to and the availability of it, and that's what the task force tries to concentrate on. You know, the users aren't always our targets. Sometimes they're the people that we get most frequently, because and a lot of the what we see are users supporting a habit, whether it be through selling other drugs or through larcenies and other crime. So those are the type people that you know, our jail is full right now. There's been talk about expanding the jail, and that's due in large part to the drug use.
So is there a chance that the drug, am I understanding this correctly, that there might be some correlation between the larcenies and the drug use in the terms of supporting a habit?
Yeah, I certainly believe that, and we see that. This past summer we had a series of break-ins in residential homes, mostly in the north end of the area. Mm-hmm. And since they were in a kind of confined in one region, we thought it had to be someone in that area, someone felt comfortable. And it turns out that they were from Bedford County. They were coming here because one of the guys was somewhat familiar with the area. They were coming here and going into houses, stealing jewelry, precious metals, and within a couple of days they had a connection with a jeweler. Within a couple of days they were selling that jewelry, and that was being shipped out and melted down. So, and that was driven by a drug habit.
And do you think that being an officer in a college town, some of my friends mentioned that they've experienced some larcenies and break-ins. Do you think being an officer in a college town is much different than being an officer in a college without, or in a town without a college?
Well, certainly the students, and especially those out in the county, they are an easy target sometimes. Mm-hmm. And we've tried to educate, and I don't think it's as bad as in years past, but in the past when students left for breaks, Christmas break or Thanksgiving, they leave a lot of their valuables behind. A lot of times the doors would be unlocked. And there was a certain group that knew that and would prey on them. But I think that's improved a lot over the years. All
right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you for joining us. And I'm Tori Dickerson with the On Record portion of the Rockbridge Report.